Legends, what's up? It's Darkmech here, and today I'm breaking down the tank side of things for the Death Knights on Wrath of the Lich King Classic. So for all you retail Andies like myself that are coming to play Wrath and wondering what's going on, this video is going to cover it. We're doing presences, runes, core abilities, rotation, talents, and glyphs. Now if you are brand new to Wrath or you're coming over from retail, you'll quickly find out that talents have a lot more flexibility in this version of WoW than the retail counterpart. You'll have also probably noticed, like me, that every time you went to look up different DK builds for Wrath of the Lich King, you got 100 different pieces of information. Some contradicted each other, and that had a lot to do with what patch cycle that information was released in, and some of it was also just plain wrong. The information I'm going off today is from Wowhead and the Blight Club Discord. Mabrito, if I probably said that wrong, I apologize, but I think he's the most reliable source of information that I've been able to find so far. So Wrath is starting in patch 3.4, and that means that Blood is the tank spec. Now in the early stages of the game, tier 7 where we start out in Wrath, Frost is still a fantastic tanking option due to not taking enough damage to really exploit the value of Will of the Necropolis in the Blood tree. So Frost will still deal more damage than Blood, and it is still a fantastic tank option, so do keep this in mind, though as the further we get into the expansion, Blood really comes into its own, but Frost and Unholy and things like that is still more than fine for dungeons. So DK presences, we're going to start here before we barrel into rotation and things like that. DKs have 3 presences: Blood, Frost, and Unholy. Frost presence is your tank presence. If you are tanking, this is the presence that you are in. Bonus armor, bonus health, damage reduction, and increased threat means that you are doing it wrong if you are not in Frost presence. Talking about runes, because there's a big difference here. Unlike retail where you have 6 universal runes that feed certain abilities, Wrath functions a little bit differently. There are 4 types of runes. You start off with 3 sets of 2. You have 2 Blood, 2 Frost, 2 Unholy, and these runes fuel your abilities in your toolkit. Blood runes enable things like Blood Strike, Blood Boil, or Rune Tap. Frost runes enable powers like Icy Touch or Howling Blast, and Unholy runes fuel abilities like Plague Strike and Death and Decay. And then you have your death runes, and these runes can be spent as though they were any other type of rune, allowing you to exceed your normal rune expenditure of Frost, Unholy, or Blood runes. It's important to understand what runes fuel what abilities, and be aware that if you're a retail Andy like myself, that Death Strike is not a spender in this version of the game. Death Strike still functions the same around self-sustain and the healing side of things, but it requires a Frost and an Unholy rune to be able to use, and it generates 15 runic power. Abilities that require 1 rune to activate will still generate 10 runic power. If you have no regular runes available, death runes will be consumed in the order of what that rune was before it was converted. Sounds a lot more complicated than it actually is. You'll get used to it pretty quickly. So talking about core abilities, you've got disease appliers, or disease applicators we'll call them. Icy Touch, this is your major threat ability, and it also applies Frost Fever. Plague Strike applies Blood Plague to the target. Pestilence will spread your diseases, and you can glyph an ability called, or you can glyph a glyph, that makes sense, called Glyph of Disease, which will also refresh the disease timers and consume a Blood rune instead of a Frost or Unholy rune. Runic spenders here are Death Strike, so this is massive damage and self-healing. Blood Strike, this is your primary Blood rune spender in single target or 2 target encounters. Blood Boil, so this is your main rune spender at 3+ targets for blood runes. Death and Decay is a fantastic ability for AOE threat and damage. Runic power spenders, Runic Strike is the main one and basically the only one that you're going to use. Now Runic Strike is only usable after you dodge or parry an attack, and Runic Strike is fantastic damage and really high threat, so don't miss your procs on Runic Strike. Your taunts, still the same. Death Grip, it's off the GCD, which is awesome, can grip an enemy to you, same as usual, and Dark Command is your traditional taunt. Interrupts wise, you've got Mind Freeze. The difference here though from retail to classic is it's not ranged, it's melee range in classic, and unlike in retail, it costs 20 runic power to use it. However, there is a talent Endless Winter, which you will most likely pick up which makes it cost 0 runic power. Defense wise, Rune Tap is a heal in this one at the cost of a blood rune. Vampiric Blood grants you 15% of your max health. It also increases healing from spells and abilities, including your Death Strike. Icebound Fortitude is a 30% DR. You can glyph it up to 40% DR, and it also has an impact of how much defense you have for 12 seconds. Anti-Magic Shell is your use for magic damage abilities, so they're your core crux abilities in your toolkit. Moving into the rotation side of things, as with all things in Classic, there's a lot of layers, in regards to rotations and openers and things like that. There's single target openers, there's AOE openers, there are threat-based openers, there's a blade barrier open, but for the sake of simplicity here, I am going to give you a single target opener and an AOE opener on rotation, and this will serve you for raids and dungeons, full stop, no problems. So talking about pre-pull stuff, it's kind of the same function as it is in retail in regards to you want to pre-pot when you're at max level doing raid content, let's say, and you're going to use indestructible potions when you're at max level. They're a Northrend potion, it's a giant armor boost that lasts 2 minutes, and you'll want to use this as a pre-pot and then again throughout the fight. Horn of Winter is another thing that you want to use pre-pull, and make sure that you keep this up whilst you are in combat. You're going to pre-cast Death and Decay 10 seconds before a pull if you want to min-max, and this will generate 15 runic power for you. Using it 10 seconds before the pull means that you'll have your rune back available prior to pulling as well. You can also elect around this Blade Barrier pull option to double Blood Boil twice before the pull, which will give you Blade Barrier before you move into the pull if you know you're going to get slapped extremely hard. So, single target opener, you're going to go with Death Grip or Taunt, Icy Touch, Plague Strike, Death Strike, Blood Tap, Icy Touch, Blood Strike, Empowered Rune Weapon, Pestilence, Icy Touch, Icy Touch, Icy Touch, Death Strike. Okay, so you'll see it on the screen here, or however my edit Poglord decides to do it. Now this opener enables the activation of your Death Runes early enough through the use of Death Strike and the talent Death Rune Mastery, which you'll find in your Blood Tree. It gets Blood Tap on cooldown early enough to give it the best uptime throughout an encounter, and it also applies Blade Barrier, which you want to have active whilst you are tanking. An AOE Trash opener, so when you are moving into packs in dungeons, drop Death and Decay straight away, Icy Touch, Plague Strike, Pestilence, Blood Boil. Super easy, you will have tons of threat from that. Talking about talent build options now. I'm going to give you 4 build options and their corresponding glyphs here. If this is your first interaction with glyphs, you have 3 majors and 3 minors. You can slot these in and they have an interaction with certain abilities in your toolkit. So the first build we're going to cover off is a default single target raid spec mitigation build for blood. It's 43-23-5, and this would be the build you would use if you were main tanking bosses for your guild, let's say, or your pugs. So the talents of notice throughout this tree here, we're going to start with Unholy and Frost. 5 of 5 in anticipation. It's 5% dodge that is not subjected to diminishing returns. 3 of 3 talents in improved Icy Touch. Icy Touch, remember, is your main threat generating ability. This is increased damage, reduces the melee and range attack speed of the affected target as well. 5 of 5 in Black Ice. This is a 10% damage increase to all Frost and Unholy abilities. So your Icy Touch, your Blood Plague, your Frost Fever, Death and Decay. This is simply just more damage and more threat. 5 of 5 in Talons. This increases your attack speed by 20% for 20 seconds as long as Frost Fever is applied to the target. Pretty easy to maintain this just via your normal rotation. 3 of 3 in Frigid Deathplate. This is 3% miss, which is undiminished. Do keep in mind though that Runic Strike will only proc from dodges and parries, not misses. Then moving into the main point spend section here, which is the Blood Tree, you'll go all the way down to Will of the Necropolis, which is what makes Blood such a strong tank, especially when you get into the later tiers in Wrath of the Lich King. So along the way down the Blood Tree here, we're going to pick up things like Improved Death Strike, Vampiric Blood, Abomination's Might, Veteran of the Third War, Spell Deflection, Improved Rune Tap, Bladed Armor, and Blade Barrier. Now points of notice here, 5 of 5 points in Blade Barrier. This is 5% DR as long as your 2 front blood runes are on CD. 3 of 3 points in Death Bone Mastery. This turns all your Frost and Unholy runes into Death runes for the entire length that you stay in combat, which gives you far greater access to Death Strikes. 3 of 3 points in Veteran of the Third War, Strength, Stamina, and Expertise. 3 of 3 in Spell Deflection here. This procs off all damage taken from a boss. Direct spells and AoE, you can proc a 45% DR here, which is huge. 2 of 2 points in Improved Death Strike. This increases the damage dealt, Death Strike crit chance, and the healing you gain from Death Strike. Now, glyphs that you would run in a build like this, your mages, Vampiric Blood, Glyph of Disease, and Glyph of Rune Strike, and your miners would be Raised Dead, Pestilence, and Blood Tap. Now, questions that you might have straight away when we start going through talents here, if you're coming from retail, are we seriously not picking up Dancing Rune Weapon? Dancing Rune Weapon in Wrath is a DPS cooldown. The copies don't actually gain any of the threat modifiers to you, so it's a decent choice for just straight single target damage, but that's about it, and that's its use. What about Heart Strike? It doesn't do much damage. It replaces Blood Strike, which isn't needed. It does jack all threat. It's just not really a worthwhile pickup either. Now, moving into build number 2, this is a blood build that's based around AoE, so it's a great blood build for dungeons. 43, 20, and 8. So, great option, as I said, for dungeons. Focuses a lot more on dealing AoE damage via Death and Decay and Blood Boil. The changes from the last build that we'll see in this one is we're dropping points out of the two-handed weapon specialization in Blood, we're losing Bloody Vengeance as well in the Blood Tree, and we're picking up Bloody Strikes, which increases your Blood Boil damage. You're going to drop the 3% melee miss chance from Frigid Deathplate, and you're going to put those 3 extra points into the Unholy Tree in Morbidity, which increases the damage and healing of Death Coil, but the big one for this one is it reduces the cooldown on Death and Decay by 15 seconds. You can then pair this with Glyph of Death and Decay, which increases the damage of your Death and Decay by 20%, and you're pumping out a lot of AoE damage. Glyph-wise in this build, Vampiric Blood, Death and Decay, and Disease, and your miners, Raised Dead, Pestilence, and Blood Tap. Third build is Double Buff. Now, what the fuck is Double Buff, brah? Double Buff is set around raiding, so if you're not raiding, you can skip this one. This build enables your enhancement shamans to be able to drop their talent points for increased haste, and you then cover that role. You'll drop points in anticipation, you'll drop 1 point from Frigid Dreadplate, and you will also pick up Glacial Rot, which is 20% more damage from Icy Touch, so you're gaining even more threat, and then you pick up Improved Icy Talons for the Raid Melee Haste buff, and you will still provide the buff from Abomination's Might for attack power. Glyph-wise, mages, Vampiric Blood, Disease, and Rune Strike, miners, Raised Dead, Pestilence, Blood Tap. The last build we're going to cover off is a Frost build. So build number 4 is a Frost build because, as I said at the start of Wrath in Tier 7 and things like that, content isn't as challenging and Frost is a fantastic tank choice option. So 12, 54, 5 here. And as I said, huge use for this one throughout the opening tier. This build has all the blood mitigation options that you would take in your raid tank build, but then runs deep down the Frost tree, gaining 2% extra DR via improved Frost presence, and then you can also pick up Threat of Thracian, which means that you are a dual wield tank. This is a thing in Wrath of the Lich King. You can elect to play Frost with a two-hander, though it's not going to be as strong due to dropping out this talent, which is really what makes this build sing. This build deals a significant amount more damage in AoE than Blood does because you've got Howling Blast. If you're not your group's main tank and you're not scared of dying, you've got good healers and things like that, this is the spec that you will play in the opening of Wrath. So glyph-wise here, mages, Frost Strike, Disease, and then you can take either Howling Blast for AoE situations or Obliterate for single target. Your miners, Raised Dead, Pestilence, and Blood Tap. Now, if you want to play two-handed Frost with this build, you would take the 3 points out of Threat of Thracian because there's no point in having this with a two-hander, and then you could put it into something like the two-handed weapon specialization on the Blood Tree if you're wanting single target and just more damage, or you could put the 3 points into Morbidity in the Unholy Tree for more AoE damage. And then you would just change your glyph accordingly. If you wanted AoE, your glyph, D&D as a major, or if you wanted single target, you go with Oblit. So that is it. If you have any questions whatsoever, hit me up on the comments below and I will do my best to answer them. I've been going down a wild rabbit hole in finding out all this Wrath information for myself and having an absolute blast, and I figured there would be a lot of retail players like myself moving back to Wrath who actually never played DK in Wrath. I was a rogue and this information is all new, so I wanted to arm you with it as well. Make sure you check out the channel for the other guides, like, comment, subscribe, come join the Discord. I'll see you all next time. See you, fam.